last session of the day. Thank you, Kevin, for pressing the magical red button. Thank you all for attending. Our talk is participant-led UX. This is an exciting time for Drupal because it seems like we've got Drupal 8 out, and now is a great time to start looking at some of the user experiences and get through iterating upon them and improving them. So this talk is about a process that could be used to iterate and to learn and to figure out if we've got the right priorities. Before we really get started, I made a note to myself, how many people are Drupal folks out here? You've worked with Drupal, you understand Drupal. How many people are UX people? Ooh. Yay, we've got UX people. So, it's okay to raise your hand multiple times. Good.
Either or, it's okay.
I'm pressing the button that's supposed to go to the next slide. And
you may just want to hit that.
I'm just going to click. My name is Chris Weber. I'm a Drupal person as well. This is not an AA meeting. I'm a software engineer. I do Drupal things. I am very passionate about improving Drupal. To my left here is Mr. Christopher Stephan. UX developer.
I'm a team lead now, which means I've got a little gaggle of UXers that I kind of shove in directions. Say, do this, do that, do the other thing. No, not like this, like that. That kind of thing.
He's being modest. Christopher's expertise, many would say, is user experience research. And this is in part a talk that Christopher Stephan has given in the past about user experience research. And without further ado, let's get into the details with Christopher Stephan.
Thank you. As Chris alluded to before, I'm the other Chris in the room, and I will be your madman in a bow tie for today. So we're talking about participant-led usability today, which is a brand new methodology that was created here in the Twin Cities metro area between myself and a couple of folk here at the U of M. If any of you have met Nick Rosencrantz in the Usability Lab, he's my kind of co-conspirator in the formation of this particular practice. So the first thing I wanted to show you is this lovely little Dale Carnegie quote, which is kind of a clarion call reminder that when we're doing user research, when we're doing usability, when we're trying to find out anything about what we ought to be trying to accomplish with software, it's really not about us. And when I say not us, I mean not you as an individual, whether you be a designer, developer, or have any other role, product owner, doesn't matter, whether you're part of a team. Just because you think you know what your thing should do doesn't mean that the thing that your thing is doing is what the person you expect to use your thing wants to do with it. And this is about kind of getting to the root of that. So what do we know about UX and usability? Now, I could poll the room a little bit, but I figured I'd kind of shortcut this a little bit and give you some quick summaries. So this is what UX is. And this is my definition, but it also happens to be the definition of Nielsen-Norman Group. If you don't know who Nielsen-Norman Group are, they're easy enough to find on the web. They've been kind of writing the book on usability, at least, for decades. And Don Norman and his book, The Design of Everyday Things, is one of the things that got me into being a UXer as opposed to just a designer. And that's a conversation we could have later about what the difference is if we get there. And I may babble about it. Sometimes I can't stop myself. Usability in a nutshell, then, is, of course, the extent to which that product can be used with specific users in mind, their effectiveness, their efficiency, their satisfaction. And that's, again, not me. That's the International Standards Organization telling us what usability is specifically. So the discussion of the existing method, and we'll start with the traditional approach to usability. So we start with UX, how do we actually get this information? Usability being one method by which we can find out whether or not a tool or a system is serving its intended population well. And the existing traditional methods being its scenarios are provided. They don't necessarily match a user's needs, their experience, or their mindset. If you think about that, that means that, well, look, we're being counted. Maybe I'll back up a little bit. Yeah, and that the tasks are predetermined and don't necessarily reflect a mental model or an approach to problem solving. We'll get deeper into this a little bit later, but that's just sort of a little preview. So the mechanics of traditional usability, who actually defines a task? Now this is game for popcorn. Who decides what we test when we test anything in usability? Has anyone done usability ever? Excellent. We've got 1, 2, 3, maybe 4. Okay. So who actually decides what the tasks are when we test? Anyone? Don't make me say Bueller. Yes? Generally speaking, yes. So it's either the UXer, it's the designer, or it's the project team who sets up that test. They decide what the tasks are that are important. And sometimes it goes back to the stakeholder. The stakeholder says, this is what's important about this software. This is what we need to test. You're going to test that because I care about it. Second, do we expect all users to have the same needs and mental models? Well, I don't. You may have other answers. But generally speaking, when I'm sort of broadcasting software of any kind to any population, I don't expect any one user to have the same exact need set as any other user, and what's more, I expect that one user's need set to evolve over the course of the day as we get closer to lunchtime, as it becomes time to sleep, etc. So why do we set up a rat's maze for these users and judge success based on how their needs and behavior actually fit with that particular pattern, our pattern, the pattern of our stakeholder, the pattern of that designer, that UX, or whoever set up that test paradigm? So we have to find ways to actually listen to users as opposed to forcing them down specific paths and seeing whether they trip, stumble, and fall there. The methods of the actual users we're trying to speak to and engage with are our actual teachers. So what does it mean to then to be participant-led as opposed to traditional? Now, the participant-led approach to usability is about discovering user scenarios and testing them in an environment based on the tasks that they bring to it as opposed to the tasks that we would ask them to undertake in that environment. Prescripted steps then are set aside. It doesn't mean that you don't write your test parameters. You don't write down those things that you think are important to test. What that means is that you actually take that and you set that aside and instead focus on those tasks that are created in the exercise to see if it matches that list that we created, then put in our back pocket for later. Which is interesting because that reveals a lot of stuff about whether or not what you thought the system was going to need to do is actually what your audience thinks that system ought to be able to do. So it's a bit less like watching a rat run the maze and more like an ethnographic exercise in that you're bringing people into an environment and asking them to bring their mental model to it. What is this? What is it supposed to do? How should it behave? Not, can you get this thing to do that thing? It's a different exercise in very many ways. So the discussion of this method is that it's more of a sensing approach. The scenario is then genuine to the user and may represent confirmation or contradiction of that previous presumed need set, that task set, what users actually care about. Tasks then reflect user approaches as opposed to assumed approaches. Now, if I need to slow down, somebody stop me. I tend to go pretty quick. So if someone's just like, no, stop drowning. Okay, just let me know. So how this then differs from the present methods is that there's a way that we actually start a usability exercise. And for those of you who haven't actually sat through one before, there are a couple of links out on the actual talk track on the website for Drupal, Drupal Camp. You can actually see the traditional and a participant-led example kind of in action. But the way that the participant-led method varies is that instead of just jumping straight into the usability exercise with task 1, we set aside a block of time at the beginning to basically find out what scenario 0 is. And now this is something that Nick Rosencrantz of Usability Lab had given to him by one of his clients, which was that take a moment to describe out loud what you look for to decide whether or not any college is a good fit, which is not anything to do with the screen, which has nothing to do with the software that's about to be tested. It's a framing question that basically contextualizes this person's approach to the system that they're about to be exposed to. So the entire idea of participant-led really basically takes this concept and makes it the core of the entire testing engagement. We set aside time at the very beginning of the exercise to ask, what are your tasks? What are your needs relative to this space? What do you expect to be able to do here? What are the tasks that need to be accomplished? And you write them all down. Now, I told you we'd prepared tasks and scenarios ahead of time, and that we put them in our back pocket. Now, there's a reason, because we may need those later, maybe. But for now, we're going to record the list that we've been given, and we're going to test that. As soon as we're done interviewing, we're going to say, okay, the first thing you told me about was buying apples for less than 50 cents a piece, or whatever that task happened to be in that environment we were trying to work in. And we give them, at that point, the browser, the screen, control. We don't even show them the screen before that point. I don't want them to see the logo. I don't want them to form any opinions. I want to know what they need to do before I even expose them to the environment. Now that I know what they want to do, I'll let them go in and play by their rules, by their tasks, by their definitions of success and failure. Where did my mouse go? Well, there it is. So what we get to see is mental models in action. Someone came with a task, with a need, with a goal, and we get to see them try to operationalize that model in the system that we've created, as opposed to saying, all right, so there's some cheese out there. You're going to start here, and I'm going to watch you try to find the cheese, even when that exercise is something that user may never wanted to do, may not fit their experience, may not fit their need set. I mean, I may be testing an e-commerce site and ask someone to find a life jacket or something. This person maybe hates boating and hates water and would never look for a life jacket ever. So what we're doing is we're introducing all these extra factors that have nothing to do with this person's authentic life experience, when I would rather engage what they actually care about. So if I could have them shop for a spatula because they're passionate about spatulas instead of a life jacket because they don't care, I'm going to learn more about the spatula exercise than the life jacket exercise, especially if what I want to know is it easy for you to find product, put it in the cart, and buy it? So we get to validate our task and our functional hypothesis. Now, I told you I had that task list, and I put it in my back pocket. So when we finished with this test, and I'll be honest, while I'm conducting that test, I'm thinking about, okay, as they give me their tasks, how does it match up with this one? Did they hit all the same points? Did all the things that I thought were going to be important turn out to be important to them? Or have I found mismatches? Did they have stuff that I didn't have? And did they have, and did they not tick all the boxes over here? Now, if they've got stuff I didn't have, I've got opportunities possibly to leapfrog and move forward, to explore additional functionality, additional content, additional features. Now, that sounds like scope creep, but don't panic. If they had stuff, or if they didn't have stuff on this list that is on this list, maybe I can remove some stuff from my build. Maybe there's some stuff I was about to waste my time on. Maybe there's some stuff in here that was downright annoying, and I found that out instead. So we get to validate whether or not what we thought the world was going to work like actually works like that when that individual gets into that scenario. So if I'm making sticks for crows, and I think that they're going to use them like this, I'm going to take notes when I actually give the crow the stick, basically. I've got some heat off this. This is too interesting an image for this talk. What do you think? So we go from improvements and pivots instead of just bug fixes. So when we have this predetermined path, and we're saying, can you get from A to B, we're doing things like, okay, how long did it take? Were they frustrated? Were they confused? Was there some other way that we could get them from A to B, where we're tweaking a system that's already fairly crystallized, it's fairly well defined. We're not reinventing anything. We're just making tiny modifications to see if we can get the rat to the cheese. Instead, what we're looking to do is find an opportunity to change the nature of the system. What if we had all the right functionality, but the way it was worded, the way it was aimed, the way it was framed, was actually putting our users off because it was a mismatch with their mental models and their need sets? Or it's like, well, yeah, I want to do that, but this site's annoying. Or I want to do that, but that's not how I think about this task. That's not what this is called. You obviously have no idea what you're talking about, so I'm not going to engage with you. There are chances here to make giant pivots and improvements as opposed to just making tiny little incremental changes to what you've already decided to build. And in some ways, that makes this methodology really powerful early in the project process rather than late. We can learn that an entire system is skewed even if all of its screens functionally work. So traditional usability would basically bang through the mechanics. Now, when I say mechanics, this is not the same mechanics that we're thinking about when we're thinking about QA. QA is, okay, I press the button does what we said it was going to do when I pressed it. If it does, then everything's cool. You can have a system that works exactly to spec and still have it be utter and total crap. We've actually pulled projects at the Nerdery where Chris and I both work because it turns out they were unlaunchable. There's no way they were going to succeed. And it was largely because someone bulldozed their way through not doing research, made a bunch of assumptions, said, this is what we're going to build. Darn it, we built it. Now we're going to launch it. And we said, no. Because we were equity partners in that project. And we were going to fail as much as our client was going to. Oh dear, my mouse moved again. So the problems that we solve then when we go participant-led. So there's the problems of expectation, scarcity, bias, and artificiality. These are things that are not only pervasive problems in software, they're persistent and existing knocks against using usability in the first place. So usability is one of those grand old things that's been around forever. I mean, it came out of World War II and time and motion studies and all these things when the problems being solved were, if this thing doesn't work, the person using this thing dies instead of the person that we wanted to die. Okay, that's a bit grim, but that's what usability was when it started. It was about rifles and bombers and people being able to press the right buttons and knowing what to do with tense situations without having to think about it. Now, software is not nearly so blood and guts as all this, but we can really wreck a person's day. So expectation. When we engage in usability, the expectation is that we're searching and trying to solve only mechanical problems, limiting the overall value of what we're doing. So people will say, okay, I'm not going to do usability because we've twigged that usability is only solving mechanics. And we think we've got our mechanics right. We've got a UXer on staff. He knows all the mechanics. We don't need to do usability. Well, that's laughable on other levels, but this is a persistent problem. Resource scarcity. So if I don't have time and I don't have budget, I may not want to do usability because I think usability is expensive. This is kind of tangential to the main track of the talk, but it's one of the things that we're constantly kind of talking about. Confirmation bias. A lot of people who are new to usability or new to any kind of research tend to design studies, at least early on in their game, that basically are designed to prove what they already think. It's actually difficult and a discipline measure to design a study that actively seeks to prove your presumptions wrong, which means, one, you have to realize you have presumptions, and you have to externalize them in a way that they can be tested. So most research scientists have this. Most graphic designers don't. Most web developers also don't. It's not part of the general skill set or remit unless you've had a very interesting education prior to that point. However, confirmation bias is something that can happen in this kind of soft space, and it's one of the knocks that usability gets. Well, we did all this stuff. We heard that what we thought was true. Well, was it really, or did you just do a bad study? And artificiality. So I talked a little bit before about how strange it was to make someone who would really love to hear about spatulas get a life jacket. Usability is a very artificial sort of exercise. So when I, in the classic sense, sit you down in a room next to the one-way glass, and I have you do a thing, and I've got someone talking to you, here's what I want you to do next. You're not at home, you're not at your desk, you're at a place that's unfamiliar, you may be using a browser you're not familiar with, you're using a piece of software that maybe you would never want to use, doing things that you may never want to do. And when I'm asking people to do this many things, clever people in the UX industry say, what is the point of that? Why don't I just get someone really clever like Dan Norman, or Don Norman, I should say, to sit down and analyze my website for me? He'll find 80% of the problems, and then I don't have to recruit any users. Well, that's cute to say, but Dan Norman is also not your user. He knows too much, and he cannot be relied upon to reflect the needs of your audience. But this is actually a problem. The more we tamper with the setting, the more we tamper with the test, the more we mess with the user and their context, the less reliable the information we get is. One of those things where the more I observe the thing, the more I change the thing. This is physics, right?
Quantum research.
So what do you need to actually get started if you want to start doing participant-led? So first is embracing the nature of method. And so what's the point of usability and user testing? Now, if you're me and you believe in user experience, the point is to get actionable information to inform your design and development decisions. If that's actually what you're after, then that's something that you should hold on to and keep in mind as you design your engagements, as you try to move forward and conduct your research. What do you want to learn when you conduct it? So you don't just do usability because usability is just what you do. Generally speaking, when you do any kind of user engagement, you're trying to find something out. And it's important to know as you're planning your engagement, as you're working through your project, as you're building your software, or deciding what the value proposition of your system is, even if the value proposition is it will make you waste 10 minutes less on a daily basis. It doesn't matter. You have to actually know what you want to learn when you conduct your study. Are 10 minutes saved? How many minutes are saved? Can minutes be saved? How do you want to use what you've learned when you've actually learned it? So it's kind of interesting that a lot of people who hear about a usability study or maybe doing user research, they'll say, well, I want a bunch of other stuff. Since we're talking to people anyway, can we also ask them questions about this and that and that and that? And it's like, well, what's that for? Do you really need to know where they live and what their income level is to find out whether or not they're going to use your software? You don't really. You just need to know whether or not this actually solves their problem and if they're actually a relevant person for this space who actually cares about the sorts of problems that your software solves. But what are you going to use that demographic information for when you're done? So don't like pack fluff into your engagements, so to speak. You're not excused from the basics with this approach. Now, I said you still need to know what your goals are. We talked about that a bit. The hypotheses you're testing, you know you've got ideas about what your software is going to do, how it's going to benefit the people who are going to use it. You've got to be able to externalize those and know how you're testing them. You still need to screen for participants who would actually use your system. So for anyone who's ever thought, oh, well, if I need to have people get into my system and check it out, I can go on Craigslist. I can ask my mom. Well, okay. Depending on the system that you're actually building and testing, there are places your mom will not go. There are people on Craigslist who will happily take your money even though they don't care at all about the problem you're trying to solve. So recruiting is actually quite a big deal. Making sure that you're finding people. Say you're trying to sell life jackets. Let's actually find a life jacket population. People who actually care to have a life jacket and care about how they would go about buying one. Otherwise, you basically get irrelevant information from people who are not invested in solving the problems that you're trying to solve. You still need to know what questions you're trying to answer and for whom. Are you answering design questions like, is this the right shade of pink or have I just screwed up this entire UI? Is this a viable product offering? Is anyone interested in this? Are we reliable? Are we trustworthy? Do we look like we know what we're doing? Is this a valuable service? Know what questions you're trying to have answered and whether you're answering them for designers, for stakeholders, or for whom. You still need a script. Again, you just tuck it in your back pocket before you start. You don't share that with anyone. Well, your team, but not with participants. And then you prepare a flexible session and capture method. So there is no additional work and setup. So there is a fair amount of effort that goes into putting together a usability study or any kind of research study. There's no additional work to go participant-led. It's the exact same amount of effort, but effective capture requires adaptability. And what adaptability means is the ability to perhaps improv, to engage yes and. So when someone gives you something like, well, you know, I really like this page, but I would like it so much better if there was a cat on it. And this may be the biggest non sequitur you've ever heard. It won't be the first time I've heard something that absurd. I'm not saying that people often come up to me during a usability session and ask me to give them a website that will brush their teeth, but sometimes the asks are just that unreasonable and disproportionate. I want this thing to do things that no system does. But because I care about this in this moment, I'm going to basically make this part of your problem as part of this conversation that we're having. So you need to be able to accept all of that and deal with it after the fact instead of trying to screen that out. You write it down. Turns out they're the only person who cares about having their teeth brushed while they're watching a website. Fine. We may not do a thing about it because it's not part of what we're trying to do, not the problem we're trying to solve. Any additional work you do is based on approach, not volume. So you're not doing any more work, you're just doing your work differently if you're participant-led versus traditional in usability. It costs you nothing additional. I'm not saying that usability is free. I've seen people get up and give talks about usability and say that, oh, okay, well, we can do user testing and it costs us nothing because we presumed that because everyone is on salary and we're not actually cutting an additional check, that it's not actually impacting the budget. But it is. I mean, you've got to think about all the people who are involved in doing the recruiting, the conducting the analysis, figure out what an hour of their salary costs, figure out how much time you're actually burning. Usability costs something. If you think about the people that you're actually engaging with, there's a good citizenship part of honoraria to that. So if I'm going to take 90 minutes of your time or your time, I'm going to try and give you about $100, which is the going market rate for 60 to 90 minutes, for an individual to lose from their day to talk to you about how much they love or hate the thing you just built. And then preparing flexible capture not only allows you to listen better, but it focuses your learning and your recommendations a little bit better. So when I say flexible capture, it's like, okay, when you did usability in the traditional sense, you could actually lay out a grid. And you could say, here's task 1, here's task 2, here's task 3, here's task 4. And here on the end, here's pass or fail, and how long it took maybe. You could do that. How meaningful is that? So that's a rigid capture method. There's no room in here for when they decided to go on a tangent about the spatula, because you wanted to talk life jacket. But the spatula or data they were giving you was actually important. It was probably more important and relevant than the life jacket information that you were teasing out of them painfully. So if you have a more flexible capture method, which isn't like, okay, so what happened when you got to the spatula or the life jacket page? Well, no, I'm not on the life jacket page. I'm on a spatula page. What am I supposed to do now? And everyone ends up scribbling in the margins or grabbing an extra sheet of paper, flipping the sheet over. And it turns out that's the most valuable stuff you got out of the exercise. This is the stuff that actually changed your understanding of what users' needs were, because they wanted something that wasn't part of the expected feature set. And a flexible capture method prepares you to just engage that from the beginning. And then freedom of movement requires a landscape. So your prototype or test environment may feel like it needs to be a lot more robust if you're going participant-led. And there's nothing more fun than testing a live website participant-led, because that's a great way to do diagnostic or benchmark usability, depending on your terminology. So how well is this system working now? What's great out here right now? What's crap out here right now? What should I retire? What should I add? It's a great way to get into that space. But you can do it with a prototype. The prototype doesn't have to be perfect. It doesn't have to be any more perfect than any other prototype you'd ever test with. And I'm a great fan of testing incomplete work. So you put something together in Photoshop and InVision, or you've done something in Action or in ProtoShare. You did something in Omnigraffle or let's see, what's the one I don't like? I can't remember the one I don't like now.
You like them all.
No, I don't actually. But there are a couple of wireframing tools out there that I've consciously avoided because they don't do everything I want them to do. But it doesn't matter what the tool you use actually is when it comes time to do this, because if they go off the prototype, have a piece of paper handy. You observe user choices in action. They need to be able to act on their choices, but if their choice is not available on screen for them to act on, it's possible and permissible to just draw the screen that they would like to be engaging with, as opposed to feeling like you're trapped in the thing that you sketched out for them. Capture the information, even if it contradicts your previous design decisions. You're trying to remove artificiality, so brute force intervention and moderator direction is something that you don't want to do. So in many cases, traditional usability would say, all right, here was the task path. Now, we were here, now we went on this tangent for spatulas, and somehow I've got to get you back here to finish this test. When you're participant-led, there's no such thing as getting you back on task, because it's their task. If they want to meander, they're allowed to meander, because you're witnessing what happens to them as they think about the problem that you want them to engage with. And you're probably learning a lot about it. So you don't want to get them back on your task. You want them to fully explore theirs and tell you when they're done what complete looks like, what finish looks like, what success looks like, and what failure looks like. And then you analyze your results based on tasks and goals. So when it comes time to figure out what it means, the stuff you get won't be easily converted into numbers. Now, you'll always be able to say how many people were there in the study. How many people had a hard time versus how many people had an easy time. A lot of people who consume usability or research want it boiled down into numbers because they're used to marketing research, which is all about numbers. It's all about how many people said, yes, I will buy that thing. Tangent. If anyone ever asks you to do research in which they ask you to predict future behavior, will you buy it? Do you like it? Will you use this tomorrow? The results you get are crap. And I'll tell you why. Have you ever made a New Year's resolution? Have you ever kept it? I know one person in my entire life who actually holds herself to her personal commitments. Never mind the commitments to others. I know a lot of people who do that, but these little commitments one makes to oneself. I only know one person who's ever adhered to more than, 80% of those. And I think she's very rare. So it's one of those things that I like to tell people that future me is another bastard. You can't trust them. They know different things from the you standing there right now. When you actually get there, if I'm being asked now, will I buy this tomorrow? I've got no reason to say no. I'm a pleasing human. I want you to like me. I'd rather you didn't stab me in the parking lot. I'm going to say yes. I would buy that tomorrow. Will I actually buy that tomorrow? Probably not, unless you found me again, offered it to me again, and it happened to align with my needs at that time. No predictive question. Predictive questioning gives us a lot of numbers. Don't like numbers. Synthesis will be far closer in practice to analyzing user research than judging success or failure on a task-by-task basis. So you're going to spend a lot of time with a lot of soft, squishy feedback that you're going to need to make sense of, and that's normal. That's how this is going to work. People are going to ask you for a lot of different things, and like when Henry Ford complained that if I asked people what they wanted, they'd say, build me a faster horse. Now, that was a complaint, and people use that quote to say that users don't know what they want, and they ask for stupid things. But the fact of the matter is, Henry was smarter than he knew, and he didn't actually waste any time on this feedback because what he delivered was the spirit of the request, not the letter. He gave them faster. It didn't have to be a horse. And that's the same thing we have to do in synthesis. We need to understand what the actual need is based on the feedback that we get, not necessarily that it had to be pink or a pony or something that sings, dances, or brushes your teeth. You still know that where users succeed and fail, but then you add the lenses of participant-defined success and failure and their task relevance. So you can still say, if they tried to do a task, and that task happened to match the one in your back pocket, you know if they actually managed to get that thing done. But you also know if they wanted to get that thing done, and what getting that thing done meant to them. Was this the annoying thing I had to get done to get through this task, or was this what I wanted to do? You can get a lot more information about what's important in your processes and your tasks and your features, as opposed to what you think is required on a mechanical level, because we must have this data, because someone in accounting is going to freak if we don't capture this appropriately. Is that really important? Synthesis by user criteria instead of system criteria. You make sense of your feedback based on task and the participants defined, not the screens they visit. You're going to make sense of this based on what they told you is good or bad, not what you presumed is good or bad. And you're going to match up your original assumptions with what you've learned. You're going to let them be the judge of success or failure. You're going to weigh their perceptions of success against what you thought success was going to be. Oops. Darn you, mouse. Report back what you've learned in terms of user success, system success, and model match. So when you finished a participant-led exercise, you'll be able to say, this is what user success looked like, this is how users did based on the criteria of system success, and this is how they compare, and then you can say, what was the model match? Are we doing the right thing? Are we not doing the right thing? Do we need to pivot? Are we on target? And if you do this iteratively, you get closer and closer and closer until finally these things do just align. You're trying to do things that people would like to be able to do. So if we take participant-led beyond just the frame of usability, you can actually apply this approach in more exercises than just usability or user testing. The real key to the approach is that you set aside your preconceived notions and let that person tell you what their need set is. Now that's more dangerous in a testing environment than it is in an interview environment. Most interviews or contextual inquiries are set up just to gather all the data, not to necessarily come in there with, well, we think before we talk to you that you care about A, B, C, and D, and we're going to test this. But generally speaking, you do go into these engagements, the contextual inquiry engagements, the user interview engagements, surveys that you may conduct with a set of hypotheses or thoughts that you think are already true, and that's why you're doing the survey in the first place, to find out whether or not the universe is shaped the way you think it is. You can use participant-led approaches to all of these things to make sure that you are not kind of coloring the lens for them, telling them what you want them to tell you so that they reflect, confirmation bias-wise, your own priorities. This can be applied to usability testing, the research, and any other engagement that seeks to access or capture the voice or perspective of a user audience. So anytime you're talking to a user, you can choose to be participant-led. And in every case, it provides the tools we need to check presumptions. And you're going to have them. Everybody has them. Let's be honest about it. You walk into a room, you expect things. You came in here today hoping to hear something about participant-led usability, and maybe it would be interesting. We'll talk about how that's working out for you later. And the opportunities to get participant-led. So if you've got some time with users, you can be participant-led. There's no reason not to do this. You've got Drupal users here today. You could be running an exercise in the hall. I've done this before at Usability Day, where we'll just set up a little kiosk, we'll run a little exercise, people can walk up and participate if they choose to. You can find out through screening whether or not their match is really good for our audience. But when I've done stuff at the U of M before at Usability Day, we've been targeting students, and all the people who walked by except for the faculty were students. Go for it. So we were at least well set. So talk with them, test with them, and learn from them. We can actually employ lightweight guerrilla methods in order to actually get this data, i.e. just put a table out there with a laptop. Bring a piece of paper. Be prepared to write things down. This is not a heavy exercise. Pardon me, do you happen to use Drupal? All we really need is that kiosk, a computer with a net connection, a researcher, and someone to meet with Drupal users. Be present, prepared to gather the feedback that you need, and it's really that simple, except that your usual planning and synthesis does apply. You're going to have to figure out what you're doing beforehand. You're going to have to figure out what that all meant after the fact. Some things you do not escape. And while you're at these exercises, you're going to get out there and actually engage with people out in the hallway. Next time we have a Drupal camp at DrupalCon, next time that happens, be participant-led. So it's their world, their content, and their problems. Now, Drupal is a framework. It's got a lot of potential and a lot of possibility. And it's not always been that easy to use. I've used Drupal myself. I've had to manage 2 websites in it, myself and my wife together, and we haven't had a pleasant time all the time we've been trying to manage a Drupal website. And Drupal is not alone in this. There are a lot of large framework software solutions that could do with a giant, massive revisioning in the way that user tools are implemented. So people understand what they can do, how they can do it, and basically save some time instead of going back to the forum to ask people, how the hell did you get that to happen again? Has that thing been approved? Is this a well-supported widget or add-on? So let them guide us in our efforts by sharing their goals, needs, and definitions of success. And then use that gathered intelligence to improve the system you're working on, and in events like this, use it to improve Drupal itself. So we've got Drupal 8 now. It'd be great to get ahead of 8.1, never mind 9.
8.1's already out.
Oh, for God's sake.
8.2's coming in October.
See, this is what happens when I don't talk to Chris every day. This is for you.
Thanks, Sarah. And thanks for that rundown. So, like I said, it's an exciting time for Drupal because we finally got our act together. We finally got it out the door. And now we have a lot of momentum behind improving the user experiences that Drupal have. And in fact, this camp, the University of Minnesota, has been vital in informing us up until this point about all the things that we need to improve. The feedback we get consistently is that how we interact with blocks is confusing, and the pages we send users through in order to manage blocks on a page are confusing. Just yesterday,
Worse than Tetris.
I'll let that go on the recording. Just yesterday, a patch was committed to Drupal 8.2, the development branch, to attempt to fix some of the confusion of working with blocks with the administrative UI. This is a perfect experience to gather feedback from users to see, are we really fixing the confusion of dealing with blocks? Is there more that we can do? What are some ideas about how to fix this?
Have we achieved clarity, or have we achieved a whole new layer of confusion?
Right.
That's possible.
So coming this Sunday, I hope all of you will attend the code sprint. So because we'll have an opportunity to set up a kiosk where we are having users just go and test this new patch, this new experience, to see if we can gather more information about that. Also, we know that we have an experimental accessibility feature for how we input data in forms, and is that working well with screen readers? Is it working well with people who need an alternative approach with dealing with the prompts? That is another thing that we can test and see if we can use the participant-led research method, or sort of just gathering research about that. So
if you maintain a Drupal website, you own a Drupal website, you work on Drupal websites, stop by the kiosk, give them your feedback. You're improving Drupal. You are the audience. Now, mind you, if you don't, you've never used Drupal in your life, you could sit down, you could tell them what you think. It's not the same. screening.
Key takeaways.
So back to me. So you've heard most of this before, and we'll get to Q&A in just a moment. So let your participant open all doors. Engage users at any and every opportunity at any stage. Your work need not be finished. So you could be having an idea, and you could sit down and you could discuss it with users, and you could do it in a participant-led way. You could have a prototype, partial, nearly complete, ready to turn into code. Still, a good plan. And you can have a complete website, and you're thinking about redesign. Still an excellent time to get some feedback to inform your decisions. Most of what UX does is basically unearthing actionable information. So your organization has goals. You have goals for your website, for your product, for whatever you've built. The question is, does it actually align with the goals of your audience? This is a way to find out. Do it frequently because your audience's goals are not written in stone. They change. They change with new products that enter the market. They change over years when they've gotten tired of the last thing that they've seen. They can change after they've had a particularly bad burrito because now they don't care about your software, they care about a bathroom. Throw away the conceit that your presumed uses and methods accurately mirror those of your user audience. You are not your user. I can't say that loud enough or often enough. I don't care how much time you spend with users, how much time you yourself spend in the system. You may have too much information, too much exposure. I cannot be anyone's user. I spend all day, every day, thinking about websites and interactions. So if I look at one, I start thinking about how I would do it different because I'm a designer and I can't help it. These are not the questions or the concerns of this person that you actually want to use your system unless you've designed it for very picky UXers. Then I am your user. Learn more about the context users bring to the content, the tools, and the interfaces, not just what's pleasing or frustrating. Can I get through this page? That's interesting information, I suppose. Do I want to get through this page? Is this a page I wanted to see in the first place? This is more important information. Allow user stories to be authentic and based on evidence and defined by needs, interests, and requirements of users. So if you're into Agile, and some of you may be, or you just use user stories as part of your requirements documentation, make sure that that actually ties back to something that you heard or a group of things that you heard from a bunch of users, as opposed to what you just think they're going to magically want to do because you happen to build it. Well, I built this thing. Everyone's going to want to use it. Well, really? Are you sure? Would you bet your budget on that? Trust your users to bring their truth to your work. Because it exists, regardless of what you built, what you intend to build. And if you don't know what they want, what they think, and what they need, and what you built does not match, your chances of success narrow. Now we're open to questions.
And if you have a question, feel free to either just raise your hand.
I've got one here already.
If you want to submit it anonymously, you can send it to that link.
I have a possibly anonymous question.
No, I didn't submit it anonymously, sir.
All right. So Chris had asked, what equipment do I need to do one of these studies? You basically need something that will show people what it is you want them to see, a pen, and some paper, basically. Ideally, if you wanted to go for the pro tips, you'd have something to record whatever it is that's about to happen. Now, you can use screen software that'll record the screen, and you can also use it to broadcast the screen to remote observers. So, for instance, if you had another team member who's in charge of feverishly taking notes, that's great, because if I'm working with someone and I'm basically getting them to go through an environment, it helps a lot with the flow if I don't have to stop them every 5 seconds. Nope, slow down, don't have that yet. Stop, nope, not yet. Okay, what was that? Yeah. So if I can have a remote observer who's just watching what happens on the screen and hearing the audio feed, maybe getting the feed from this camera, maybe a camera that's pointed at the I/O device, and the screen itself, so 3 points of video capture, I can get a lot of really great understanding that it's not only great in the moment for note-taking purposes, but is great for post-analysis, sharing with the rest of the team. Oh, look, well, we had this giant train wreck in the tool, and this is what it looked like. You don't believe me? Look, this is what happened. This is what you did.
And given the nature, the distributed nature of the Drupal team, being able to record the user's experiences so that folks that are...
Or even to broadcast something that's happening live.
Yeah, that too.
Any other questions? That's all I can. Yes?
So how do you reconcile going into participant-led testing with goals, but yet being adaptable and letting the participant lead you wherever it needs to go?
So your goals are your goals. What you learn basically tells you the state of your goals when you're done. So the entire point of the exercise is to find out whether or not you are well aimed or poorly aimed. They're not strictly speaking contradictory, but I would say that there are stakeholders who in the past have kind of opted to think, all right, so this is what we want to do, this is what we want to build. We've done a study, it hasn't always been participant-led. It's not required that you do this to get actionable intelligence. Sometimes it just happens to you even though you've gone traditional. As a matter of fact, that's one of the reasons I started doing this, is all the value I was getting was off script. It's like, okay, well, why am I bothering with the script? But sometimes you'll have a hard conversation where all of our goals are misdirected. What you want this software to do, nobody actually wants to do. You are literally wasting everyone's time, and you'd be much better off just basically opening an oven mitt factory than trying to complete the software. And those are hard conversations to have, and not all of them are that stark. Sometimes it's just a question of this feature set is misaimed, but it's the core of what you wanted to build. And you thought all of the people were going to come flocking to you because you offered this kind of content in this way. And it turned out that it was not different enough, it was not unique enough, and as a matter of fact, it was more frustrating than the ways to consume this content that were already available in the market. All these other things you put around it turned out to be kind of cool, but the core, the thing you dearly loved and thought was the linchpin of your system, not so good. Did that answer the question adequately?
Anonymous writes, what are some tools out there for user experience testing, just in general?
Okay, so user experience testing, if you think of it as tools, there are a couple of services. Not so much tools, but services. Usability.com, usertesting.com, Loop 11, there's a pile of people out there who are very happy to set up a user testing engagement for you using what they call a panel of users, or basically people that have signed up with their service to give people opinions for money. Now, that's fine. They'll even let you, some of them will let you write screeners to say, of your population, give me the members of your population that actually have that sort of affinity to what the project I'm building, the problem space I'm trying to engage. But that gets more expensive and it gets more custom depending on which service you're working with. Basically what they're doing is they're giving you a survey-based way to do what is basically a human activity. So if you think about what out of a survey, it's hard to ask a follow-up question in a survey unless you hard code them all with tree logic. Say if they said yes to this, then ask them this. If they say no, ask them that. And I mean, that can be done, but it's still very rigid. And you can't explore things that come from, you look confused now, or why are you now happier disproportionately than you were 3 seconds ago? You miss a lot of stuff in a survey. And when these companies offer their tools along with a camera, an audio capture, well then that's actually worse because you can't ask the follow-up question, but now you know there was more and you can't have it. That's really frustrating. Although it's frustrating for me. Maybe not everyone agrees. There are other tools that are available to do assessments like, I think it's usability.com, or is it user testing? Someone does a programmatic 5-second test, which I actually think is pretty cool. Now, hands up if you know what a 5-second test is. I'm expecting no hands to go up. It's okay. One person knows what, that's more than I expect. Thank you, sir. A 5-second test basically means I show you something for 5 seconds, I put it away, then I ask you questions about it. That's easy to do programmatically, but you, again, don't get to ask follow-up questions. So it's good. You can get a lot of data that way. Can you get all the data? Not so much. There's also everything Optimal Sort makes. If you go to Optimal Workshop online, they do Optimal Sort, the card sorting exercise. They do Tree Jack, which lets you test deep navigation trees. They've got something called Chalkmark, lets you do one-click testing with heat maps. There's a lot of good stuff out there. Reframer is something that they've built that's new that actually helps you analyze your stuff. But it's actually work. You're better off just with pieces of paper unless you'd like doing things on screen. That was a lot.
That's a lot, yeah.
Yeah, there's more than that.
Maybe we could gather some links and put them in the...
That we could probably do. But I will say this, for user testing, nothing beats actually moderating a human exercise. So there aren't tools for that. No one's made the user testing or the usability toolkit. Everything that everyone does is sort of ad hoc and cobbled together out of several different tools, which may include GoToMeeting, JoinMe, WebEx, Adobe Connect, various different things, whatever your prototyping platform may be it Paper, Photoshop, InVision, etc. There may be a lot of things coming together in that moment, but there is no one tool, and there is no tool anywhere to help you synthesize data. That's a human activity exclusively.
Awesome.
Yep. Anything else? Yes?
What was your path to get into user experience?
Oh boy, okay, history. So I started in the creative industry as a graphic designer. I did print. Along about 1994? 95? No, that's not right. No, I suppose that's pretty close. Yeah, 94, 95. The web happened and I started designing for that instead. And being that I was a graphic designer and a print designer, I wasn't doing really any better or worse than anyone at the outset. Back in the day, we couldn't put two images together until we had tables, at least not reliably. And when we did that, the developers got angry because that's not what tables were for. So the long story made short is that building websites for a long period of time, problems kept on occurring. Problems of how do we organize this data? How do we know that we're building the right pages? How do we know that this content is valuable? How are we going to be sure that when we launch this thing, it's going to succeed? And a soft science grew up around those practices, the science or the practices of information architecture, of content strategy, of UI design as a subset of kind of HCI or graphic design, depending on which way you came at it. So I was just beavering away quietly, went into a job for 8 years, and came out of that job to find another job, and I suddenly found I had a new title. I was no longer a UI designer, I was a UXer. And I had already been doing all the things that UX supposedly was asking people to do since, I don't know, 2000, 2002, somewhere in that range. I did my first usability test, my first formal usability test with the two-way glass back in 2001. And now I don't understand why anyone has two-way glass. It just makes people nervous. Was that adequate?
Yeah.
Yeah?
And so, because of the time you came through it and like development of the internet and everything was happening then, that was your path to it. But someone who wants to get into it now, what do you think? I mean, because I feel like a lot of the information is in book form. You know, it's not necessarily something you have courses about.
Oh, yes, there are.
Okay.
So there's a great introductory course out on Coursera, which actually is a very good grounding. There's some stuff out on, there's actually a pile of stuff out on lynda.com now, which gives you basics on tools and methods. So none of them are really things that will fully prepare you. There is no way to just walk into your first usability session and be fully prepared. It's not possible. And that's usability specifically, but that's also true for every other human interaction part of the UX practice. Some of this stuff you just have to do, and you will get better over time. Now, Steve Krug, who's one of my favorite authors, if you want a book to read that's fairly short and really valuable, Don't Make Me Think is an excellent book. Now, his thesis is that anyone can do UX, and he's right, anyone can do UX. It's also possible to do UX very badly. So you have to actually be serious about what you're doing and take responsibility for kind of like the remit that you're given. So backing up for 2 seconds, I want to get to your question too. UX's remit is very, very large, and it's only limited by the organization that you're working with. They tell you what you're allowed to influence and touch, and you grab as much of the universe as you can, because in order to provide a really good solution to a piece of the universe that's as big as a postage stamp, you need to actually understand its surrounding ecosystem. You need to understand what happens outside of this environment before people get there, after they leave, what brings them back, what caused them to come in the first place. So you need to know more of the universe than the part of the universe that you actually get to affect. And the more of the universe they've asked you to affect, the more of the universe you need to understand. So in a way, every time we do a development project at the Nerdery or I launch another website, UX, even though I didn't write the code, I maybe didn't do the visual styling because nobody wants me to do that anymore. It turns out I'm kind of crap at it. It's a good thing I got into UX. Everything that I do looks corporate and soulless, which means corporations love me and creatives generally hate me. This deck is a good indication. I had a train of thought, but it seems to have left the
Getting
station.
to the point.
Yeah, getting to the point. So I don't know, it's still going. I shouldn't have gone sideways.
New UXers.
Hmm?
New UXers.
New UXers, yeah. So, I mean, today, yeah, thank you. Today, there are a lot of ways to get in. We at the Nerdery actually have a list of professions that are highly relevant and close to UX as a practice. If you work in content already, say you're a copywriter, you're a content strategist, or you happen to be a graphic designer now, or if you're a business analyst, or a project manager, you probably have a portion of the skills that you need to start working in UX already. And the question is, when do you actually want to start getting serious? And you can actually start experimenting on your own. If you've got your own website, your own Twitter feed, your own whatever, you could start playing with, okay, so what could I put on this feed that will attract more people relative to a certain topic? What's good content? What's bad content? What's a good presentation? What's good language for the population I'm trying to address versus poor language that's going to disenfranchise or put people off? There's a lot of stuff that you can experiment with kind of on your own, but the gold standard is really being able to ride along with someone who's been doing it for a long time, who can kind of jump you from here to there so that you don't necessarily have to step in every rut and trip over every bump yourself. But there aren't really shortcuts as such. There's only so much a book can give you, especially for the soft skills side. You do actually have to get into your first usability session and feel like it was a total waste of time because you said all the wrong things. And it's not as bad as you thought it was, and you probably got more information than you think, and most of that comes bubbling out of your head at synthesis time, and people start asking questions of, what did that actually mean? What did they say again? Didn't everyone say that? And it actually does turn out to be valuable. But I'll say this as well. When you do things like user interviews or usability, it's worthwhile to plan a pilot with someone who's outside your project who will make you uncomfortable, because the first time you run anything always is a mess. Always. So if you haven't done your pilot, be prepared for your first session to feel like a waste of time. Even if it wasn't. Now, you had a question.
Does every website require user testing?
I would say no. So there's a gradient that you can kind of understand, and that gradient or burden of testing has to do with the novelty of the patterns and experience and features contained in that website. So if what you're launching tomorrow is just another WordPress site, your burden of testing is very, very different from a brand new file and video sharing service that has to do with using some sort of interactive paradigm to whack virtual roles. I mean, if you're doing something new and different, now I'm asking people to use a scroll bar that operates on a curve. That takes a lot of user testing. If I'm building something that everyone has built before using patterns that everyone has experienced before, my user testing can be far more abbreviated and can be more focused on content than features and functions. I mean, probably everything could do with a little bit of user feedback. Now, you might have decided that you're going to research and then build, or to build and then test, or both. But I would say no, not everything absolutely must have user testing. There are always options. Everything is better with some kind of user feedback.
I've checked the question board.
Yeah. It's got crickets on it.
Okay. Actual crickets.
Yeah.
Oh, no, that's from us.
Yeah.
If there are no more questions, thank you all for attending. And please come to the Code Sprint on Sunday. That was exactly what I envisioned.
Oh, good.
I know.